Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for How to Negotiate and Navigate Conflict. I'm Heather Braun, Assistant Director of Life Design for graduate programming at Hopkins. And I am very excited to welcome Tara Cruz and Christine Wyatt, who are both joining us virtually from Austin, Texas. I'm going to introduce them both and then kind of turn the conversation over to them. But I hope that throughout, you will use the chat to, hi Virginia, you will use the chat to ask any questions that you have of any of these topics as we go and kind of decide the direction of what you'd like to talk about this evening. So let's start. Tara Cruz is Chief Executive Officer of Re-Up Education, an organization based in Austin, which is dedicated to providing equitable opportunities to support adult learners in higher education. She has held leadership positions at Learning Marketplace Solutions at Guild Education and Entangled Group, an education venture, studio, and strategy consultancy. Tara is a former Stop Out and first-generation student who dropped out of high school only to return and go on to receive degrees from UNC Chapel Hill, Brown, and Harvard. In her words, the mission of Re-Up is to reimagine the experiences of the adult learner, quote, so that every adult has the support they need to navigate their path back to school. Re-Up provides the support by helping partner schools to find, enroll, and engage a demographic critical to higher education's future. Christine Wyatt is General Manager at Re-Up Education and has 27 years experience working in higher education institutions. I've been fortunate to be friends with Christine for the majority of these years. Her background includes working on campus for several colleges and universities in IT leadership and teaching roles prior to joining a series of ed tech companies focused on serving higher education. Previously, Christine was the Chief Revenue Officer and Chairperson of the Board of Directors at Upswing. She is also the founder of Sapling Ventures, an e-learning consultancy business committed to fueling startup growth. In a Medium post reflection on how best to address student needs, Christine shared this optimistic vision of organizations like Re-Up years before she joined their leadership team. The challenges students face are growing, but they're not insurmountable. I don't have an answer, but I know that nothing will change without action, and the solution starts with joining the ranks of those who have stopped asking what will happen and started becoming what will happen when we start listening. I am delighted to welcome Tara and Christine to tonight's session for JHU grad students and working professionals. So as we go, we are thinking that we can maybe start with this topic of conflict generally, but if anyone has questions about any of the topics for tonight, feel free to put them in the chat and I will be able to get them in when I can, and we'll also have some time at the end to ask them then. So to get us started, this topic, both of these topics are wide-ranging, large and wide-ranging, and since we only have an hour together, my apologies, I have to admit somebody. Perhaps we could start with the topic of navigating conflict in professional settings, something that I would imagine all of us at some point in our professional journeys have had to do successfully or not so successfully. So in terms of navigating conflict, can either of you talk about a time where this has either gone extremely well for you or not so? Is there a time where you want to sort of, or something that has helped you over the years? Both of you have extensive experience in these areas. Is there something you've learned over the years that's allowed you to navigate conflict more smoothly than, say, you did at the beginning of your careers? How have you gotten better at it?
But I'll kick us off. I think I had a big aha moment. It probably wasn't until my 20s. I'm from a really small rural town in Western Kentucky, very homogenous, very slow pace. and I got out as soon as I could. So I got out, went off to college, and then finished up in Europe, and then started my journey. And in my 20s, I realized I was avoiding personal and professional situations that had a lot of conflict. And it didn't have to be a scary conflict. It really was just even a disagreement. And my aha moment was to look at my family and how they modeled healthy resolution of conflict. And I realized that we just didn't, so for me, recognizing that my upbringing and that foundation of how to resolve conflict and how to approach conflict was something that I had learned, and therefore I could unlearn that behavior and create some new neural pathways for myself. So the first thing that was really helpful for me is just to realize, hey, it's not my fault that I didn't grow up with a great foundation or a framework to handle conflict, but it's certainly within my grasp to unlearn that behavior and learn something new. So that was definitely an aha moment for me. How about you, Tara?
Yeah, Heather, you sort of hinted at it in terms of like where I come from to where I am today. And I remember more recently a mentor that I really respect said that I didn't have a career ladder, I had a career jungle gym. And it's been sort of the same in like how I've managed conflict in my career. Like there's a few things I wish people had told me. And I'll give you like a concrete story. First thing I wish people had told me along the way is like, you're just going to completely mess it up. Like the first few times, and maybe like the next 40 times, like you're just going to mess it up at various points in your career. And that's okay. Like it may set you back in your career like slightly, but like it doesn't have to, for like that particular job or that particular moment, but can actually advance you in your career in terms of your skill and your capabilities. And I'll give you a great example of this. I'm not going to name names of like which organization it was or anything, but let's call it like somewhere between like 10, 15 years ago, maybe like 8, 15 years ago, I had a situation where I was like pivoting and making a transition into business. I'd started my life in sort of rural America. Christine, I very much have that in common. I then got into nonprofit work, which brought me into higher education. And at some point I decided, actually, I want to be in the business. I want to be on the business side. I'm like really curious about this. And I was in the midst of sort of making that transition in my career. I was finding my footing. I was figuring out like what my voice was. Like I was starting to get a seat at the table. And in the organization I was in, somebody just sort of came out of nowhere. Like someone I didn't even recognize, sat down in my office and belittled me in a way that like I've never been belittled in my entire career and never have since. I did not handle that situation well. Like if that same thing had happened today, I probably would have either like put that person in their place like that, or I would have like completely disengaged from that conversation and said, hey, look, this is not productive. I'm not engaging with you on this. I'm out. And like step down. Instead, I took it. And and I'll just like, I'll be honest with you, like being vulnerable, like it destroyed me. Like I like cried my way all the way home. And then I quit like not long after. That moment, I did not handle conflict in a way that I would be proud of today. Nevertheless, like it actually taught me a lot about that moment. That's like carried me forward and like pushed me forward in my career. I have learned, the key thing I took away from that is that conflict carried a huge emotional, like it was emotionally laborious and it carried a huge emotional weight for me. I had to actually take a step away and take care of myself. And I still do this to this day, even when I'm the one sort of starting the conflict or like, having the tough conversations, I do things that take care of me to make sure that I have the emotional energy to take care of that. So for me, like one of my big takeaways is like, as you do this stuff, you're not going to get it right. And even if you get it wrong and it's not great for your like job in that particular moment, it might actually be great for your career that you had that experience. Sit with it, sit with what doesn't feel good, and then work through like, how do you take care of yourself and how would you handle that differently? But when you do that, really focus in on how would you take care of yourself? Because this is not just about doing the robotic thing and saying just the right things in the right times. It's actually about protecting you, yourself as a human through what's tough stuff.
I think one of the things I've learned too is, and this took me even longer, was to learn the kind of fight or flight physical sensations you get when you feel like you're being cornered, there's conflict, and it's different for everybody. It can be like a tightening in the chest. It can be you feeling your face get hot. And then it's worse for me because if I know I'm blushing, then I'm angry, then I'm blushing, and it just makes it worse. So I learned to kind of put myself in situations, and when I feel that first like physical, that physical sensation, I'm like, oh, that's what that is. Okay. And then it's kind of like a bell curve of like an urge to act on that in a certain way. But there's a quote I love. It's attributed to Viktor Frankl. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but it's this quote about like between the stimulus that gives you this panic and this physical, sensation, between the stimulus and response, there's space, and it's in that space that is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. The trick for me was to sit, as Tara said, in that space in between and have the presence of mind and not immediately go to being defensive, but to really kind of be open to all things, and find, if you're a big fan of meditation, maybe you call it equanimity, you might call it something else, but just to sit with it for a second and think about what the conflict is, why I feel this way. Is it valid or not? Do I feel personally attacked? What's the best response for this? That takes a ton of practice. And I definitely did not get that right the first many times. And, you got to catch yourself. And so I think it's healthy to put yourself in situations where there's going to be conflict. And I also almost always thought this is going to be negative. This is going to be bad for me. And I retrained myself to almost like either mentally or quite literally write things down, situations where I went in, was really nervous or anxious about a negotiation or a conflict. It could be with a boss or coworker or with a really tough client. And things actually worked out really well. It was a breakthrough. And to remind myself, yes, sometimes conflict can be really hard, but also on the other side of it can be something really positive. You can have a deeper relationship. You can be vulnerable and come out okay. You can have a new understanding with a coworker or a better partnership with a client. If you can just sit through that moment of that discomfort, feel it, let it wash through you. Okay, great. Now let's have a calm conversation about what happens next. But I think a lot of that for me too is just saying, not every conflict is bad. In fact, that's how people engage, and people engage differently, and it's okay. But on the other side of that conflict can actually be a much deeper understanding, a much better relationship, whether that's personal or professional.
There's this, so I'm a single mom, and I'm reading a lot around gentle parenting right now and thinking a lot about how that can like apply to leadership in business. But there's a saying like, don't teach your kids not to be angry, like teach your kids how to be angry. I think the same thing is in conflict. It's not about avoiding the conflict, though I will say there are times when the other person or persons that you're engaging with are so unproductive. It's okay to like be like, I'm not engaging in this, and walk away. Like you have to give yourself that permission. The other thing that sort of like struck me as Christine was talking about, like creating that space, is if you're going to create that space, and by the way, like that's a practice, like Christine may have mastered it at this point. I'm still working through that. Like I have to like my emotions are clouds. They are cars on the street. I am watching them pass by. I'm acknowledging them. I'm naming the color, but I'm not going to engage with them. I'm not going to run out in the street. It's something you continue to work on throughout your entire life. For me, like part of my journey to getting better at that, and I think it's honestly probably going to be a practice I work on until I die, hopefully a long time from now, that people can think whatever they want in that conflict, and people will. Like you're thinking something about the person you're in conflict with, and it may be like really unfair, it may be fair. They can think whatever they want. It doesn't have to affect your personal identity. it doesn't have to, like, whatever people are having that conflict with you, or you're having the conflict with them, whatever they're thinking, whatever emotions you're reading from them, whatever signals you're getting from them, like, it can be what it is. Even if you're having a reaction, to me, like, the first step towards getting to like the more Zen state that Christine's working on is like, I've had to work on, like, when I was a consultant, I used to say, like, I've got skin like a rhino. Like, it's going to take a big caliber bullet to break through me. I would tell our young consultants who are joining our firm that all these people who get angry, all these people who get upset, like, it's not about you. It's some other thing. It's how their family managed conflict. It's all sorts of it. That's really about them. Don't internalize that in who you are. So as you think about those, like, those steps towards managing conflict and managing conflict in a healthy fashion, like protecting, like acknowledging what's going on, but not letting that like form into your personal identity is really, really key to giving you the confidence of being able to do it. Otherwise, you're going to be scared of doing it, because every conflict is going to start challenging who you are as a person. And hell, I'd go in some consulting things and people were really freaking mad at me for something that somebody on my team did. And I was just like, I hear you're mad, but like, I still feel really good about myself. So let's work on what you're angry about, and work through some solutions.
One of the things I've learned too, especially if it's this is difficult conversations that also overlap with conflict. So if you're an introvert, also, a new study came out, you're 3 times more likely to avoid conflict than extroverts. That's extra fun for those of us who kind of think of ourselves as introverts and identify that way. But one of the things I try to do, if I know it's going to be a conversation that's likely to be riddled with conflict, is I make a plan. And if it's a hard conversation at work, I make a script, just because in the moment, if you're having your best day, you might live in that space and have a great reaction to conflict. You might not. I like to kind of anticipate how the conversation might go. And I try to be really fair and objective and not put my negative lens that I sometimes have, because, conflict is scary for me growing up. I go in and say, okay, like, what's the worst thing that can happen to? And I say, well, okay, that's acceptable. Actually, I'm okay with that. Or what's the best outcome here? And I think that'll, segue shortly into negotiation. It's about, if you're uncomfortable having a conversation that has conflict, you think it's going to be about, something that's really conflict ridden, just make a quick plan, make a quick script, write down what's important to you, write down what you want to convey, and then listen. I find myself, I want to be seen as articulate, and I want to have a great answer to all the questions. And when you're in a leadership role, especially in some of my roles, I'm the most tenured because I'm also the oldest person in the company. And they look at you, you think you have all the answers. I'm like, no, I don't. But let's talk about it. Let's get, to a place we feel good about. But some of it is just being prepared, having that plan, and then, hey, try to listen to understand, and don't listen to respond, because then you're not really listening. At least I'm not really listening. If you really hear someone and they feel heard, and, Tara just did this with her, consulting examples, to say, I hear that you're mad. Instantly, that person's internal temperature goes down just a notch or two. You've acknowledged, hey, I see that you're upset. Let's talk about it. And that person usually will start on the downtrend of being angry, and then they also can hear you and be heard. It's a much better conversation to have if you're just listening to understand instead of listening so you can get that response. People aren't mostly interested in your response. They're mostly interested in being heard and feeling seen.
Totally. I'm very curious, like, what questions you all have about conflict,
Totally.
especially when we get to negotiation.
Yeah.
While you're thinking about them, just in case nobody has one, like, on the spot, Christine, I've got a question for you. Like, we've actually been talking a lot about, like, how to take care of yourself, how about when conflict isn't good, like when it isn't good, like, how do you react, and all those things. You've, like, in time I've known you, like, you've handled some, like, tough situations, like, really masterfully. Like, maybe you could give, like, maybe we can give everybody like a positive example, like of something like, maybe a story or something that you can share, or you're comfortable sharing that's like, it worked.
Yeah. I've had a lot of client interactions in particular where, sometimes someone along the line sets an expectation for a client, and it doesn't really matter who it was, and it doesn't really matter what you're selling, software, service, what, consulting, it doesn't matter. They're mad. They have a reason to be, and you get tapped in to go fix it, to go diffuse it. And I've had some great luck. I had one client that was in New York, and I'm from the South, so we have different communication styles. And they really were being demanding in a way that just wasn't rational. Unfortunately, somebody earlier in the chain had set some expectations that we just couldn't meet as a company. And it was my unlucky job to make that very clear to them, but not lose them as a client, hopefully. So in this case, this person was really hard driving, very strong personality. You all can't see me, but like I'm a slender, small person. Like I don't take up much space in a room. I don't have a big booming voice. So this one time I rolled the dice and I went New York toe to toe with this guy. And he paused and he said, I don't think anybody's ever spoken to me that way. I totally get it. Okay, I hear what you're saying. It's not going to happen. I understand that you're taking accountability for your team and what I was told, and we're good. But sometimes you just gotta kind of mirror, the person you're looking at and speaking to, and what do you think will resonate with them. And other times, it's just about truly making them feel heard. My number one favorite thing too is if in the moment I can't commit to something or I don't know what to do, sometimes I'll just tell my team if they're on the call with me, I'm not committing to anything in this call. So I've already let myself off the hook for that. And I know I will make a wrong decision because it's emotional, it's conflict, or they're angry and I feel uncomfortable. Sometimes I'll just tell my team or myself, I'm going to listen, I'm going to understand, I'm going to provide clarity. I will hold people accountable if that's myself or others. I'm not going to commit to anything that they're going to ask for. And I'm going to tell them that pretty firmly. And I'm going to come back with something that's fair, that's a win-win. But those are a couple of things like, man, read the room, know who you're dealing with. If all else fails, kind of go toe to toe with them if you have to. But if you're going to roll that dice, you have to be ready for what comes next too. And to be fair, I've seen Tara in quite a lot of conflict-ridden situations, and she handles herself very well. So,
well, thank you. I curious, like, what questions do you have? Like, we're over here just sort of chatting. Like, Christine and I actually we'll have drinks and talk about this all the time. But like, would love to hear if there's anything you're struggling with or questions that you're having. And I think we got
a good one.
Yeah. I'll read it out for everybody. Just because I never know if like chat actually records in the videos. So one discussion topic area I'd be interested in hearing about how to initiate these challenging conversations versus how to be on the receiving end of a difficult conversation without having the person walk all over you. Christina, I can jump in first.
Go for it. Yeah.
If you want. So we hit on it, in terms of initiating a challenging conversation. I think we've hit on a few things, just sort of randomly talking, but I'll tell you sort of my pattern. First thing is I do a lot to sort of take care of myself. I give myself space. I make sure I don't have to deal with anything else in that day. I do it on my terms, on my time and my thing. And sometimes that means I don't do it immediately in the moment. Christine modeled that in her recent story. It's I'm not committing to anything in the moment. Do it on your time if you can, or as much as possible. Something comes up and you need to deal with somebody you work with. You don't have to do it in that hour. You can wait. You can let your nervous system calm down. You can go and get a manicure, get a massage, whatever you need to do. Listen to some really loud music, whatever you need to do to get your positive energy up. Do it on your time as much as possible. The second thing is script it out. If you're really worried about it, script out what you're going to say. But also, and Christine mentioned this earlier, go ahead and script out and think about the things that they could say. Like, this is totally fair. You don't have to have every response out there, but you can go ahead and think through all those things. It diffuses it in a way internally, even if you're not going to respond to the things you think they might say in that moment in the exact same way, it sort of diffuses it. You take the anxiety out of, well, what if they do with this, or what if they do that? Because you've already thought through it. Like, you've given your brain a chance to like run through the motions. Those neural pathways are already built. And really, like, truly give yourself space and grace when you're in those moments. You're not always going to handle it perfectly. In fact, you will never handle it perfectly. There is no perfect to these situations. And they're not always going to be resolved in that time. Don't put the pressure of, oh, I've got this hour and I've got to solve this in this hour. It might take 10 conversations. It might take 3 months. I've had difficult conversations with people I've worked with that, man, I did not want to have that conversation, but we had it, and we had it again and again and again over months. And then all of a sudden we're like in a much better place months and months later. So I think we oftentimes, like, we see this played out in media, like we see this played in all these things, and it seems like it's this, like, go in and say, hey, you know, I don't appreciate how you handled this, or I don't appreciate how you talk to me, or you're not doing a good job. And then all of a sudden there's like resolution. But that's not, like, I mean, think about your relationships. Like, that's just not the way it works. So give yourself space, do whatever you need to do, build yourself up, script it out with what you're going to say and what they might be saying. So, like, get your neural pathways firing so you can be responsive in the moment. Don't be afraid to, like, walk away and let it come back again. And again, like, even if you haven't managed conflict in the business sense before, chances are you've managed it through other parts of your life. Pull some of those best practices that have worked for you. And like, how does that differ from being on the receiving end of the difficult conversations? Obviously, everything I just said, like all that prep work, you can't do. I think one thing I've done is, like, when I think somebody wants to have a difficult conversation with me, like, and they like set up a meeting or something, I just ask them ahead of time, be like, hey, sounds like you want to talk about something. Can you give me an agenda? Can you give me a topic so I can be prepared and I can think about it? So, like, when you can, again, try to give yourself space to, like, pre-diffuse the energy, so you can come in a little bit clear-headed. Sometimes you're just going to be blindsided. And again, but even then, like, the thing I would encourage you is, like, don't feel like you have to react in the moment. Christine, again, she modeled it perfectly. You don't have to make any decisions. Even if they're coming at you and saying you did something wrong, you don't have to say you're sorry in that moment. Maybe you were completely wrong. It's okay to go, yeah, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. I'd really like to think about this. Can I think about this and get back to you? If they're in any way a decent person, they're going to be like, yes. So, like, in all of these things, try as much as possible to not put pressure on yourself in the moment. Prep where you can, ask for what you need from people, and don't be afraid to just give yourself that space.
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you, Julia. Great answer, Tara. Agree with all of that. I like to, and I learned this from a book. I'm not going to take credit for this, but it's a book about healthy boundaries, which is fantastic. I like to ask permission, especially in a work setting, if I have feedback for someone or recommendations. And it works really well in your personal life too. If you could say, can I tell you something that might be hard to hear? Are you available for that conversation right now? And if they say no, my job is to say, okay, I totally understand. Would you let me know when you think you are in a place you're ready to have that conversation or receive that feedback? I do the same thing at work. Sometimes I'll say, can I offer some feedback? Or are you ready to have a difficult conversation about the way you handled, this part of the call? I just ask permission. It's an agreement then, and that person knows something is coming, but I'm also asking, like, are you available? Are you open? Is now the moment? Or do you need some time, to Tara's point? And that's fair. And then again, if they say yes, that's my job, is to say, you come to me, when you're ready, when it's a better time for that. When it comes to being on the receiving end, it's that fight or flight sometimes kick in, and that, you maybe even go to the third option, which is freeze. That's everyone's favorite, right? Where you just do nothing. Sometimes you don't know that's coming. I love Tara's advice of like, hey, if you feel like, and I like to be super proactive, especially if it's a situation where it's like a manager or a client and you're like, something's off. Go and say, I feel like something's not right. And I'd love to have an open conversation with you about that. I'd love to know what's on your mind. Can we set aside some time to do that? If it's unexpected and you don't have the time to prep, I also 100% agree. Your job is to listen and absorb. You don't necessarily always have to respond. It's important to acknowledge. And if it's feedback, I always try to thank people. One, it's really hard to give somebody feedback. It's challenging, it's tough, right? It's conflict. So when someone cares enough about me to give me feedback, I always try to remember to say thank you, especially if it was constructive or something they think I could have done differently or better, because it wasn't easy for them to do that. And that truly is a gift when someone cares enough about you to say, Christine, the end of that call, you kind of lost your temper, or I think you probably could have handled that better, and maybe just tabled that decision, whatever it is, like that's feedback I probably needed to hear. So if it's feedback and it's hard, I thank them. I also agree with Tara. You don't always have to agree to anything or admit to anything or say you're sorry. Say like, I am a big believer of saying like, I really want to give this some thought. It's clear that you thought it was important enough, that we had this conversation, and that, maybe you're upset about it or you're worried about my performance. I'd like to take some time and then revisit this. And I do think if you can, like say tomorrow or Wednesday or whatever, like don't let it keep going, like give yourself a deadline and say, I really want to give this some careful thought and then bring my thoughts back to you. And then can we have that conversation at a later time? But I think for me, I've definitely had some of those surprising conversations, whether it's clients or personal ones or, managers or, all kinds of things. And the trick is, okay, I'm here to absorb this information. What's my responsibility next? I really need to make a decision in that case. Okay, trust your instincts, do the best you can. If you can table that and you feel like you're not going to make the best decision in that moment and you don't have to make an immediate decision, give somebody a timeline and say, you know what, that. I thank you for bringing this to my attention. I want to think about it. Can we meet tomorrow over lunch? And just that way, that person also, again, feels heard, knows you're not putting them off, but also give yourself that space you need to go off and think, not fixate, just think, and then come back and have a calm conversation at a later time.
Totally agree. I feel like I always learn a little bit something from Christine every time she talks about these things.
Practice.
Sadly, we both get a lot of that. I got a private message asking about how to navigate male-dominated industry, being undervalued for the same work as male coworkers, and like how do you advocate for yourself? This is a tough one, y'all. I mean, by the way, this is something that I think women, I know Christine and I talk about this a lot, like we go through forever throughout our careers. That's just like the sad truth of it. But it's also something that affects like any underrepresented minority in an industry where you're not like the other, but likely that your same work is going to be valued a little bit different. So I'm going to tag team Christine on this one because I think she probably has some nuggets of wisdom, and you're always able to like just pull out quotes from books. Like I admire your capability to do that.
It's that liberal arts masters that Heather and I share.
I can't even remember like the text I wrote 10 minutes ago, or maybe what it's called 40 minutes ago. So this doesn't go away, sadly. It's the sad truth. And I think there was recently some estimates out there that like at our current rate, it's not going to go away for like another 100 years. There's a few things I've learned throughout my career. Like one is I have to focus on my own confidence. It's why you've seen me talk so much about this. Actually, both Christine and I talk so much about this. You have to be able to go in and focus on your own confidence, whatever it is that builds you up, whatever it is that like makes you feel strong, makes you feel powerful, however silly or however rational it might be, do it. Like, y'all, and like sometimes when I say it's like sometimes silly, if I'm going into a meeting, like it's a board full of like a bunch of like big and powerful men and they're all in suits, I will show up in a t-shirt, nice jeans, nice tennis shoes, and a really nice jacket. And like it throws them off their guard, but it also makes me feel strong. Now that might make you not feel confident. That might make you feel actually insecure because you look different than other people in the room. But like you got to find your thing, like that thing or things that like build you up. Because if you can't, these things are going to continue to happen. You're going to have these conversations, sadly, throughout a lot of your career. If you go into that as strong as possible, you don't have to be like superhero, but like as strong as you can be in that moment, it's going to be good at protecting you for whatever the actual outcome is. So that's like piece one I've learned throughout my career. You know, there's a lot of different methods to actually approaching the conversations themselves. And I don't think there's like, I'll tell you what's worked for me. I tend to not default to talk about inequity right in the conversation, like right. And part of what I personally found, and again, that's not a judgment on anybody who wants to take that approach and like talk about the inequity right out of the gate. Personally, I found everybody's guard gets up like the second I name inequity. So I start from a place of me. What am I worth? What is my work that I'm doing? And I talk about that from like a very personal conversation, because then it is digging into, you hired me. It's putting them on notice that this contract goes both ways. It like I can walk at any given point in time, and I'm making clear that I know what I'm worth. I know what I do, and I expect them to do something about that. I always start from that place. Now, I have had times when that didn't get the job done, said, hey, look, by the way, like you're pushing back on me and telling me you think I'm worth this, and I think I'm worth this. Hey, I know what's happening elsewhere in this organization. Like, you need to give me an answer on why that is. And I don't assume like they've done it on purpose. Like, I actually just put them on the spot and ask them to justify themselves when I do like fall back, or when I do have sort of the inequity conversation. The last thing I would say is, I've had a lot of friends, and I've been one of these people who've like fought the good fight and like sacrificed myself to try to change a culture and try to change an organization. Compared to where I started earlier in my career and to today, there are a lot more organizations out there that actually care and think thoughtfully about this. Don't be afraid to leave. Like, don't be afraid to like try something else. Some of the biggest advances in my career have come from like, I was just like, screw this, I'm out. So like for me, I start with confidence. I then go to focusing on just myself. Don't make it bigger than me for the moment. Then I have the conversation around inequity, and then I get into the others. Now, I spoke, or then I think about leaving, and I spoke about that as like because the question is sort of centered on yourself. It's a different thing when you're trying to advocate for inequity within the organization. You have to talk about that right out of the gate. But sometimes you're focused on taking care of yourself, and that's okay. And sometimes you're focusing on actually calling out the organization because you believe it can change. Christine, I don't know. you.
No, it's really solid advice. I think especially, and I hadn't thought of this before, starting on a personal level makes it human, and it's disarming instead of putting somebody on the defense, which is, I think, really savvy. I've not thought of that before. My career started in IT, quite literally in the late 90s. It's hard to find a more male-dominated field than IT in the 90s. And I left because I got to a point where I was at a director level. The next step was CIO. It was a really political, small liberal arts college is political role to be a CIO there. And I did not want that job. I didn't think it had good work-life balance. And, I knew the people I managed in some cases made more than I did. people on the team made more than I did, and I had more experience. I managed people, I managed budgets and money for the institution, and I managed other strategic initiatives. And I got paid less than some of the people I personally managed. And so I asked for what I wanted, and they said no. And I said, I'm leaving. Because like, honestly, and that's not, look, I want to be abundantly clear. It's a privilege to be able to go somewhere else. I looked for a job for 18 months and this was, part of that swing. So I had, a network, which I highly recommend you always have, is an active, meaningful network where there's give and take, particularly with women and minorities, whoever you identify with, like keep those people close, talk about these things, help each other out, forward those great opportunities. A friend sent me an opportunity that got me out of IT in college into my first startup. And from there, my career took off. Had someone said yes, my career might look really different. In some ways, I'm so glad they said no, because I left. You know your worth. If you can leave, plan for that, have a network, all those things. But I think it's not going away. And I think there's knowing your value and knowing your worth on a kind of personal level, and know what you know and what you're really good at, and frankly, what you're not. In terms of kind of chipping away at that culture, I think it was Obama's administration where the women had this tool that they created and used in meetings. So if Tara says something and then Jack says it later and he gets all the credit for it, my job in that meeting would be to say, I think that's great, Jack. When Tara brought that up, I thought it was a great idea. They would amplify each other's voices. They wouldn't let someone else take credit. They would make sure women didn't get spoken over and that they had room to speak. And sometimes that's just as small as in a Zoom meeting or in a real, like face-to-face setting, saying, Heather, I haven't heard from you yet. Is there anything we've missed, anything you'd like to add, and pull people into the conversation in a way that isn't, uncomfortable for them, but give them a spot at the table, support each other. And then quite literally know your worth. It is much easier than it used to be to see what you should be paid. There's a lot of public data out there. If you're going in, and maybe this is a great segue, in the last few minutes we have to negotiate for your worth, do your homework. Know what you're worth. It's not as hard as it used to be. A lot of jobs are posted with salary ranges. There's a movement for transparency. It's the right thing to do. It's been the norm in Europe for a long time. We're just a bit behind here, but know your worth, quite literally go do your homework. But it's not easy.
One just final passing thought, y'all, when you're in a position of power to do something about this, do it. You won't always feel like you have the ability to do that, but when you get there, do it. First thing I did when I took over Re-Up is I took everybody who reported to me and I looked at gender imbalance. We fixed that like that. I just went to the board. I said, this person's not making enough. It's unfair. We're moving them up. Now we do an analysis. We're doing it right now to look at gender and racial imbalance throughout the organization. Are there people who are being underpaid just because of who they are? What does the data tell us? Then when data points out we have a problem, we fix it. I'm in a position to do that now. I might not have ever been in the position to do that had I stayed at some of those organizations earlier in my career and tried to fight the good fight. I focused on getting in a position where I could make a difference, but there's a lot of different ways you can do that. Whether you're fighting the good fight in, or you push to get yourself in a position to actually have the power to do it. Don't beat yourself up. Do what's right for you, but give back when you can.
Love it. Really good question in the chat. Terry, you want to tackle that one and then I can tag on?
Sure. Do you have any suggestions on how to get cross-functional or cross-departmental teams out of the blame game to be more solution-focused and reflective? Is there a reason you kicked this over to me? So Christine and I working together. This one's really, really hard. Our organizations, almost every organization in the country is becoming incredibly complex. It's not just about like the complexity of the organization. Like there is more knowledge than we've ever had in human history. I think I read a study once that like in 1900, human knowledge was reproducing it like once every 100 years. By 1950, it was like once every 25. And IBM estimates, don't quote me on this because 99% of statistics are made up on the spot. But like it's something like human knowledge is going to reproduce in 2030 like once every 12 hours, like totally double. So like it's not just like a cross-departmental like human dynamic thing, it's that there's so much to know now. Like knowledge management's grown really hard, and then that like amplifies just natural conflict within the organization. The thing I found that like works is honestly I just name it and call it out with everybody in the room. Like in other organizations I've been in, I've just said, hey, look, you're all doing this, not like calling any one person out, not doing anything. There may be people in the room that are like completely innocent, but like bring everybody together and say, this is what I'm seeing. This does not work. Don't feel like you have to solve that problem as a leader. Like they are fully developed, grown adults and like really exceptional leaders, sometimes like more experienced and more talented than even you are. You will likely find yourself, and I find myself like surrounded with Christine, that you're going to find yourself in leadership positions in your career where the people who work under you or work with you are even more talented than you. And like when you've hit that spot, like, yay. I found that when I see this, I call it out widely, collectively. I have individual conversations about it when it pops up. And then beyond that, like, I don't put it on myself that I have to like completely solve this. I put it on people to solve it and say, I will jump in and help if there's an issue and there's a tension you can't work through. But you got to be like working through these issues yourself. It is not my job to like break up the blame game.
Mhm.
But I know, Christine, I said this because I know you and I've talked about this several times of like, how do you handle this? And like her and I are constantly thinking there, how you manage cross-functional organizations.
Yeah,
And
it's
curious your
you know,
advice.
I've been in a lot of different startups, and if there's a lot of cross-functional work, or if you're just joining a new team and you're trying to kind of sense what the lay of the land is, what the politics are, and the landmines, so you got to step on them. Like some of it is if you are either running the project team meeting or you're the leader and the most senior person, and everyone's looking at you like, fix this. I usually have this balance of, first, it's agency. Does everybody in this room feel empowered to do what we're asking them to do? And I ask them like, hey, Heather, do you feel like you have the resources to get this done? And if she says no, okay, that's fair. Let's talk about that. So does everybody have agency? They feel like they can do this. Great. And then I talk about accountability. Okay, Heather, you said you have the resources. Pick it on Heather. That's great. I'm going to hold you accountable. It's you own, and I use words like accountability and ownership and all those sorts of things. You own this piece of the project. And then I ask, since they're the one doing the work, what's a reasonable timeline? And then they give me a deadline. And if it doesn't work within the project or, whatever, that's fine. But if everybody has an opportunity to say, I do or don't have what I need to accomplish this, okay, that's a good starting point. Let's remove those barriers. And then I say, okay, you've just told me you have what you need. So I'm going to hold you accountable for that, but I'm going to allow you to choose your timeline. Like, what's a reasonable time to pull this research together and get that back to me? And Heather says, I can get it by Friday. And I'll say, okay, great. And at the end of the meeting, I either verbally summarize, or like whoever's running it, or we'll put it in Slack or an email. This is everybody's part. And everybody signed up for this. And if you need to change it because you find something that you didn't know, I can't do this by Friday. This data is corrupt. I can't get it, or, it just doesn't exist. Whatever it is, great. Just the rule of thumb is like, tell me before Friday, not after, and not Friday, like 1 p.m. Can't do it. So I like, just be fair. Like, does everybody have what they need to get this done? Great. If you do, what's that timeline look like? And then blame becomes really hard. Because I am now very clear on what I'm responsible for. And if I have a blocker for that, I have a path of escalation to do that. Yeah. All right, do you want to do like a speed round on negotiation?
I was just going to say those were fantastic responses and excellent questions. In the time that we have remaining, um, perhaps we could talk a little bit about the kind of skills that you've gained in negotiation over the years. I think that for those on this call, specifically how to use what you've talked about already with conflict. I feel like if I was going to offer this again, I love the rhino skin, how to develop rhino skin, right? That could be an alternate title. If you do not yet have rhino skin, what are some skills that you've developed over time? Keeping in mind, Tara talking about like messing up the first few times that have helped you become a better negotiator, but also what are some things that you've seen as a leader others do that you would not recommend that be done? So things that have worked and have not worked, both for you and that you've observed in people that you have hired or have worked with.
Christine, you want to go first? You want me to?
It doesn't matter. I can go first. Yeah, things that work for me. We've talked about this before. I also think I have to tell myself, because look, lifelong practice with conflict, it's never gonna be perfect for me. I have to tell myself negotiation doesn't have to be conflict. In my mind, it's compromise. So it's give and take. If it's a personal thing or a business thing, like figure out what you want or what you and your team and your company need. And then ask yourself what you really want. And then what do you absolutely need and what you'll accept. So you understand what your boundaries are and where you want to go. If you choose to take a really hard line on something, be prepared to not get anything. So if it's like a job offer and you're really going to push them and you're going to be firm on a salary or something else, and that's all you're going to get, that's great if you can walk away from that thing. I don't think ego has any place in negotiation unless you want to lose, honestly. So the things I've seen that don't work well are the people who come in and they're very hard charging. They talk over you. They don't listen to you. They try and tell you what's about to happen next. Already I'm thinking like, ooh, do I even want to work with this person? Or do I even want to work for this company? Or do I even want this client? I think inflexibility and ego or narcissism are the things that work really poorly, or overplaying your hand. You better know what you're worth. That's great. Be reasonable, ask for what you want and need, and then be flexible and already go in. I love when I'm writing a contract or going in to do a deal or something like that. If it's like a true give and take, I will always put something in there that I expect them to reject so I can give them something. Nobody wants to get all their points ticked off on a negotiation and walk away empty-handed. It doesn't feel good. Give somebody a win. Give them something that you can flex on and be flexible. And it really feels like a compromise. The best negotiations are a win-win. It doesn't have to feel like conflict, but do that prep. If they ask for this, I'm going to counter with that. If they say no to this, I'm going to ask for that. And just do your prep. Walk in expecting to compromise though too. You're probably not going to get everything you ask for in every situation, but you won't get anything you don't ask for in many ways too. So I don't know, Tara, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything. I totally agree that, they are more compromises than negotiation. That's really, really critical, and like excellent advice from Christine. I think that the key I want everybody to take away is like the other thing she said there is like, know your worth going in, because sometimes, especially true of women, it can be true of like any underrepresented minority in a field where you're underrepresented, is sometimes you're so focused on compromising, you're so focused on helping that other person like get the win, you sacrifice yourself. And women, it's statistically true, like we don't ask. So therefore we oftentimes don't get, and hopefully we have good bosses who say you should be asking for more. Building on everything that Christine just said, absolutely, like any like aggressive things, like you're building a relationship there. If you're winning all the things, you're setting up for a bad relationship. The thing I would say is like, if you're doing this for the first time, I'll go back to like a common theme. Take care of yourself. Figure out like, what is your preferred medium to talk about this? And I'll give you a quick example because we're running out of time. First time I was like really negotiating, like true negotiation. It was my first, like my second or third tech job. I decided like I was going to play to my strength, which is humor. So they were hiring me for a sales job. I called them and I was like, hey, you offered me this. I thought about this. And, you know, I think it's a test that you offered me that lowball number, because why would you want a salesperson who doesn't negotiate with you? I know what you really want is for me to ask for twice that. Like, and hey, I think like I really appreciate you wanting me to pay me that much money, but like I don't think it's right for the organization right now, and I want to be a good team player. So tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take 10% more. And you can feel good that I'm a negotiator. You can also feel good that I care about the organization. Can we agree on this? And they just laughed and they're like, you know what? Yes. Like, and like it caught them off guard. And like, so these things, like the takeaway from this is find something that feels authentic to you, especially if you're doing it for the first time. I don't do that anymore. Like I feel comfortable enough to do it. Find something that feels authentic to you. Don't be afraid to like have a real human engagement. And sometimes like it doesn't have to be this like hyper serious thing. Like it can be more natural. It doesn't have to be this big ordeal. There is no one way to do this. It's like one of my favorite stories from my career, and it got me what I wanted.
Thank you. That's fantastic. So we are out of time, but thank you so much, Christine and Tara, for being here. I feel like this was a fantastic Women's History Month event, even though I did not intend it to be. And so thank you for sharing your expertise and for the group's questions, which were excellent.